There's an argument to be made that civilization itself is what one could only call socially maladaptive. Now, hear me out here. There are a lot of things in general about civilization that are maladaptive. The obesogenic environment, the chemicals we use, the noise pollution, the list is very long. But by saying that civilization itself is, in fact, maladaptive in a social sense, what I mean by that is the fact that we're really just all strangers to each other. Many of us live in large to gigantic cities. We're so far removed from, frankly speaking, the way our ancestors lived, in small environments with small groups of closely related individuals, that it's almost impossible to not feel a sense of isolation, not feel a sense of strangeness, a sense of being a stranger to other people, and of course, conversely, that other people are strangers to you. This seems to be an unavoidable consequence of civilization. You might call it a price that we pay for the grandeur, the majesty of what we've achieved as a species. But the problem here is that there's no going back, obviously. There's no way of going back to small tribal units where people were just hanging out with people related to them. And let's be honest as well, just because you're related to somebody is no guarantee that you're going to get along with them, or even that they're going to treat you particularly well. We have many, many instances that we can observe in our lives. I certainly can observe these things in my life, and I'm 100% sure that you in your life can observe these rather tattered and ruined relationships with people that you're genetically related to, your blood relations. It's not always smooth sailing with those either. But that aside, civilization itself conspires, not consciously obviously, I'm being abstract here, conspires to make us feel very isolated and feel very alone in the world. And it's simply a consequence of how it's all set up. There's nothing you can do when you're living in a city of 1 million, 2, 3, 4, 5 million people to not feel some sense of isolation. Because civilization itself is socially maladaptive, for the obvious reasons that I've cited. Now, that said, the question that is then raised, or ought to be raised, is what should you do in response to that? And I think that human beings, if you observe them carefully, have a very automated response to this. They might not know the details of why they feel a certain way. They might not know the details of the fact that 20,000 years ago their ancestors lived in small, close-knit units that were mostly composed of people related to each other. But they feel that something is off. And what do they do? What do we all do, to be perfectly blunt and honest? We try our best to drive away that sense of loneliness. We try our best to drive away that sense of isolation by engaging in activities and things that could only be called chatter, a way of passing the time. And socially in particular, when you look at people who are highly social, they're constantly engaging and interacting with other human beings, this is especially true. And I don't think there was ever a time that was more indicative of this in recent years than the time of the Great Pestilence, when all the normies, the social butterflies, the socialites, they were so accustomed to being their extroverted selves, all of a sudden found themselves in this lockdown situation where they couldn't socialize in the conventional ways they had gotten used to. And the suffering they endured was immense. Now, what does this illustrate? That they maybe feel better when they're amongst people? Probably. That's definitely true to some extent. But another facet of this is the fact that what a lot of people are actually doing is they're trying to chase away something they feel in a very deep sense in themselves internally with chatter, with superficialities, with social interactions that are not necessarily a remedy for anything, but nonetheless serve an important function. And what is that function? The function is simply to drive away any feeling of isolation, any feeling of loneliness, any feeling of strangeness. You're not amongst strangers because you're happily talking your head off to them, and they're regarding you seemingly fondly, and you get along with everybody seemingly. And it's only in those moments, those downtime moments, when you might hear the voices in your head, as it were. The voices that might remind you that, maybe you are a little bit more alone than you thought you were. Maybe you are more of a stranger than you thought you were. Maybe, when things are actually put to the test, it turns out that all those people that you thought you were really good friends with were just the classic fair weather friends. And that's kind of the point if you think about it. The whole concept of a fair weather friend is basically someone who is there to serve as chatter, who's there to serve as a reason to not think about certain things. These are not meant to be reliable people, reliable allies in your life, people that actually care about you and for your welfare, or the outcomes of your life. These people are there to drive away the voices of loneliness that you are almost invariably, inevitably going to feel. And if you're the kind of person, and I suspect many amongst my subscribers are this type of person, that does not particularly value fair weather friendships and superficial interactions, that is your answer as to why so many people bother with them. Why they have, quote-unquote, 30 different friends, 29 of which they're not particularly close to, because these 29 serve as this mechanism, this vehicle to sort of drive away the voices of loneliness, to dumb down the voices, to numb that potential feeling of sterile pain. Now, not everyone is like that. I don't personally assign much value to these fair weather friendships, unless it's something that serves some other purpose, like there's a common hobby or what have you, and you just happen to participate in the hobby and they do as well. That's fine. But generally speaking, I personally eschew fair weather friendships. They have their purpose under the sun, no doubt, as I've just explained, but they don't have a lot of value, at least to me, and I suspect to many of you they probably wouldn't have much value either. We're left then with a dilemma. Most people out there are running around 24/7 trying to chase away that feeling of void, that feeling of loneliness, because again, civilization, it seems to me, is inherently socially maladaptive in the sense that it does not contribute to your social well-being. It tends, probably almost inevitably, to amplify those feelings of loneliness and isolation. Well, if you're going to be in that situation, if you're going to live in civilization, if you happen, like most of us, not to live in a cabin in the woods or on a mountaintop in an isolated desert somewhere, that's most people, obviously, then you have to think about how do you deal with this. Now, personally, I don't have an issue with people who just happen to maintain fair weather friendships, who engage in this sort of superficial chatter and interaction because they get something from it. As I mentioned, it serves a function, but if you're not like that, if you can't simply just drive away this feeling of isolation and loneliness, of strangeness, what do? Because I really think there are different types of people when it comes to this. The amount of situations I've been in my life where I was surrounded by people that I thought I was good friends with, even people that you could argue were close friends of mine, certainly in relationships with women, where you just feel incredibly isolated and lonely, despite being engulfed by crowds of people potentially. Well, that tells me that there's something about me, and probably something about many of you, that just doesn't jive or sync well with normiedom. And the thing I've learned over the years is isolation and loneliness is inevitability. There's nothing you can really do to completely drive it away. Yes, you can, in theory, spend your whole life chasing after social opportunities to sort of plug in the holes to make sure you never feel that. But ultimately, it's an exercise in futility. Ultimately, in your downtime, you'll be forced to confront this feeling of isolation, this feeling of loneliness. And there really isn't a way around that. You just have to accept it and not view it as something that's inherently negative. Yes, there are many things that are natural to us that are inherently negative, but I don't think this is one of them. Whether you're actually isolated in a physical sense, i.e. in the sense that there's literally no one around, or you're not isolated in that sense, i.e. you have your friends there, your family, your partner, whatever it might be, you're still in that situation if the chatter doesn't work on you, if it doesn't drive away those thoughts. And what I've learned over the years is you have to use that time positively and constructively. So on my walks, for example, if I'm not outright listening to something like a podcast or music or what have you, I will spend time thinking about things that I personally find interesting, certain topics and tasks that I find personally intellectually stimulating and motivating, and I try to think about and try to work it out in my head. Or I try to be practical and think about how I'm going to map out the next couple of weeks. Or in a more abstract sense, if I'm listening to music or what have you, I just embrace it. I just sort of feel the loneliness and I accept it, and I even appreciate it. And I appreciate it in particular moments, like when I'm listening to a certain track of music that I know very few people could relate to or they wouldn't appreciate. But I know that in that moment I'm appreciating it. And that makes me then appreciate that moment even more because I'm the one who's appreciating this particular track of music. So it's an inevitability, this feeling of isolation and loneliness. It's a consequence of civilization, but it's also a consequence of your own personality, your personal phenotype. And it's in those down moments, rather than getting overwhelmed by them, like the social butterflies did back in the day in the time of the Great Pestilence. These were not reflective people in general. there's still good to be had in such conditions, even if it isn't always optimal. Now, I'm not arguing that we are not social apes. We are social primates. We need to interact to some degree. It's just that the core baseline is one of isolation and loneliness. You're trapped with your own thoughts in your own mind, and you are the only one who's consistent with that. And you're the only one who can actually relate to that. Yes, you can, in theory, relate to other people, but at the end of the day, you're the only one that can relate to yourself with yourself. Anyway, as always, thank you for tuning in. Many special thanks to my very generous patrons on Patreon, my donors on PayPal. You guys are the best. Without you, this channel simply could not exist. Thank you so much. You have my everlasting gratitude. And if you can hit the bell icon, that thing that looks like a bell, be much appreciated. Be informed of my videos. And if you can engage in the usual YouTube jazz of liking the video, sharing the video, subbing. If you're not yet a sub, be much appreciated. As well as leaving a comment. Also helps with the algorithm. If I'm still alive, I'll check you out next time. Until then, may the gods truly watch over you. Bye-bye for now.
If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you enjoy my content, please consider making a donation or becoming a patron. Thanks for watching.